Welcome to Wetrussad. Do you ever get that sudden, icy feeling that you're being watched? That primal instinct telling you to look over your shoulder, but you're too terrified of what you might actually see? Tonight, we are diving into the darkest corners of the internet to bring you true, deeply unsettling stories that will make you question your own safety. So lock your doors, check your windows, turn off the lights, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. Let's begin.
Story 1. The Whiteout, based on the winter hike. I'll be the first to admit it, horror movies are right. When people do stupid things, bad things happen. But you never think you're going to be the cliché until you're freezing to death in the middle of nowhere. A few winters ago, two buddies and I decided to go hiking in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It was the dead of winter. The air hurt to breathe, but we thought we were invincible. We started on a marked trail, but about 2 hours in, we got cocky. We saw a ridge that looked cool and decided to go off trail to check it out. That was our first mistake. Within 45 minutes, the sky shifted. A heavy gray front rolled in, and it started snowing. Not just flurries, a total whiteout. We turned around to follow our tracks back, but the wind had already erased them. We were completely lost. We had no cell service. We had one half-empty water bottle between us. And worst of all, my friend Mark was wearing thick denim jeans. Pause, never wear cotton in the snow. Once the sun dipped below the tree line, the temperature plummeted. I watched Mark's jeans literally freeze solid, they sounded like stiff cardboard when he walked. He was shivering so hard his teeth were chipping. Panic makes you do irrational things. We argued, and despite my screaming protests, we decided to split up to find the road faster. It's the dumbest thing you can do, and I knew it, but desperation took over. I took the left flank. After 10 minutes, I was completely alone. The silence of a winter forest is heavy. It's a dead, suffocating quiet. I yelled for Mark. Nothing. The snow absorbed my voice instantly. As I pushed through a thicket, I looked down. I saw fresh footprints in the snow. My heart leaped, I thought I found someone. But as I stared at them, my blood ran colder than the air. They weren't boot prints. They were bare human feet. Distinct toes, pressed deep into the freezing snow. And they weren't crossing my path. They had merged onto my path, following directly behind me. I didn't yell. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were bleeding. I eventually burst onto a logging road, where, by some absolute miracle, I found my friends. We made it to the car just as frostbite was setting in. We almost lost fingers that night. But to this day, I have never told them about the bare footprints following me in the dark.
Story 2. The Voice at the Intersection, based on the gut feeling. This isn't a traditional scary story with ghosts or stalkers, but it shook me to my core and completely changed how I view the world. If you want to call it divine intervention, a glitch in the matrix, or just a random neuron firing, fine. But I know what I heard. It was around 2 a.m. I was driving home from a late shift, cruising down a long, empty stretch of highway at my normal speed, about 60 kilometers an hour. I was tired, zoning out to the hum of the engine. Up ahead, maybe a quarter-mile down the road, there was an intersection. I had a solid green light. The roads crossing the highway were completely obscured by dense, old-growth forest. You couldn't see if anyone was coming from the left or right until you were literally in the middle of the intersection. But it was 2 a.m. There were no headlights. No reason to slow down. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, a thought popped into my head. It wasn't just a passing thought, it was loud. It was like a voice right next to my ear, clear as day, saying, "Go slower." I don't know why, but I listened. My foot moved from the gas to the brake on pure instinct. I dropped from 60 to about 30 just as I approached the green light. The exact second my front bumper reached the edge of the intersection, a massive, rusted pickup truck blew through their red light from the right. They had no headlights on. They were doing easily 100 kilometers an hour. The wind from the truck violently shook my car as it blasted past me, disappearing into the dark. If I hadn't hit the brakes, if I had ignored that random thought for even 1 second, I would have taken a full-speed T-bone directly to the driver's side. I would be dead. No question about it. I pulled over to the shoulder and just shook for 20 minutes. Sometimes the scariest things aren't monsters, they're the absolute
Story
fragility
3,
of life,
The Blurred
and the
Room,
terrifying
based on the
realization that something unseen
hospital/coma
might be pulling the
isolation.
strings.
Trigger warning for this one. It deals with severe neglect and medical trauma. You could argue it's more depressing than terrifying, but when you are the one living it, the line between sad and horrifying completely disappears. Growing up, my home wasn't a safe place. My parents were entirely consumed by their addictions. Food was a luxury we rarely had. When I was a teenager, I started getting incredibly sick. I was starving, weak, and constantly throwing up. I begged them for money to go to a doctor or just to buy real food, but I was told it wasn't worth the cash. I survived on popsicles for days until my body just gave up. I fell asleep on the floor. When I woke up, I was trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I had tubes down my throat and wires taped to my chest. The room was incredibly dark, only illuminated by the sterile, blinking lights of medical monitors. I had no memory of how I got there. Later, doctors told me I had started throwing up blood and slipped into a coma. I had been unconscious for over 2 weeks. But the scariest part wasn't the coma. It was waking up completely helpless. My vision is terrible, and my parents hadn't bothered to pack my glasses. So everything was a smeared, terrifying blur. Nurses would come in and out, but they were just faceless, shadowy shapes speaking in hushed tones. I was paralyzed by weakness, confined to that bed in the dark. I had no phone, no music, no internet, just my own chaotic, terrified thoughts. My parents never visited, not once. They wouldn't even let my sister bring me my glasses because they were paranoid she would steal them. Imagine waking up in a strange place, unable to see clearly, unable to call out for help, with the crushing realization that the people who were supposed to protect you left you there to die. I spent days staring at the blurry ceiling, listening to the agonizing sounds of the hospital at night, the beeping, the distant coughing, the footsteps of strangers. It was a profound, suffocating isolation. I survived, eventually, but the terror of that
Story 4.
blurry,
The 3
dark
a.m.
room
gas
has never
station
left me.
smile. I used to work the night shift at a remote gas station in Nevada. If you've never driven through Nevada at night, you need to understand the isolation. It's just you, a pool of fluorescent light, and miles of absolute, pitch-black desert in every direction. Usually, my shifts consisted of making terrible coffee and reading paperback novels. But one Tuesday night in November changed everything. It was around 3:15 a.m. The chime on the automatic door went off. I looked up from my book. A man walked in. He was tall, incredibly thin, and wearing a suit that looked like it hadn't been washed in a decade. But what immediately set off my alarm bells was his face. He was smiling. Not a polite, customer service smile, but a massive, ear-to-ear grin that showed way too many teeth. His eyes were wide open, unblinking. He didn't go to the aisles. He walked straight to the counter and just stood there, staring at me. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just kept smiling. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. The only sound was the hum of the industrial refrigerators in the back. I slowly moved my hand toward the panic button under the register. Finally, after maybe 3 full minutes of agonizing silence, he tilted his head to the side. "You're all alone here," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Before I could press the button, he turned around and walked out. I watched him through the glass. He didn't walk toward a car. He walked straight past the gas pumps and disappeared into the absolute darkness of the desert. I locked the doors and called the cops, but they didn't find anyone. When I reviewed the security footage later, a cold sweat broke out on my neck. Before he came inside, the camera caught him standing right outside my car in the employee parking lot for over 40 minutes, just staring at my license plate with that same horrific smile. I quit the next day. Story 5. The Trail Camera. My family owns about 50 acres of dense woodland in Appalachia. My dad and I are big into hunting, so we set up motion sensor trail cameras all over the property to track deer movements. Every few weeks, I go out, swap the SD cards, and plug them into my laptop to see what we caught. Usually, it's just raccoons, coyotes, and the occasional buck. A few years ago, I was clicking through a fresh batch of photos from our most remote camera, located about 2 miles deep into the woods. The timestamps were from 3 nights prior, around 2 a.m. The first picture was triggered by a large buck. Normal. I clicked to the next photo, taken about 10 minutes later. The buck was gone. In its place, at the very edge of the camera's flash, was a figure. I zoomed in. It was a person, completely naked, crouching behind a tree. But their proportions looked wrong. Their limbs looked unnaturally long, and their skin was stark white against the dark forest. My heart started pounding. I clicked to the next photo, taken just 2 seconds later. The figure was closer. It was crawling on all fours, low to the ground, like a predator stalking prey. But its head was snapped completely upward, staring dead center into the camera lens. Its eyes caught the flash, glowing a sickly yellow. The expression on its face wasn't human. It was pure, feral malice. There were no more pictures after that. Whatever it was, it knew the camera was there. We called the local sheriff, who sent a couple of deputies to check the area. They found nothing. No footprints, no abandoned campsites, nothing. My dad tried to convince me it was just a prankster or someone on heavy drugs wandering the woods. But no human moves like that. I haven't been back to that part of the woods since, and we took all the cameras down. Sometimes it's better not to know what's out there in the dark. Story 6. The GPS Dead End. I used to drive for Uber to pay my way through college. I usually stuck to the weekend bar crowds. Drunk people are annoying, but they're mostly harmless. One night, I got a request around 1 a.m. for a pickup in a pretty rough part of town. The rider's name just said A. I pulled up to a dimly lit street corner. A guy in a heavy hoodie got in the back seat. I asked, "4A?" He just nodded. The GPS told me the drop-off was about 20 minutes away, out past the city limits where the suburbs turn into industrial zoning. As we drove, the silence in the car became suffocating. I tried to make small talk, asking how his night was. No response. I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was sitting dead center in the back seat, his hood pulled up, head down, hands deep in his pockets. About 15 minutes in, the GPS directed me onto a gravel road. The streetlights vanished. We were surrounded by abandoned warehouses and empty lots. Then, the app told me to take a sharp right down an alleyway between two massive, derelict buildings. "Hey man," I said, "are you sure this is the right address? Doesn't look like much is back here." He finally spoke. His voice was completely flat. "Just follow the map." I turned down the alley. It was incredibly narrow, littered with trash. At the very end, the alley just stopped. It was a dead end against a brick wall. The GPS cheerfully chimed, "You have arrived." I put the car in park and kept my foot hovering over the gas. "Looks like this is it," I said, not looking back. Suddenly, a set of headlights flicked on directly behind us, blocking the only exit out of the alley. A dark SUV had pulled in right after me. My blood ran ice cold. I looked in the rearview mirror. The guy in the back seat was slowly pulling his hands out of his pockets. I didn't think. I threw the car in reverse, slammed on the gas, and slammed the back of my car as hard as I could into the SUV behind me. I heard glass shatter and metal crunch. I threw it back into drive, managed to wedge my car onto the sidewalk, scraping the entire side of my vehicle against the brick wall, and peeled out onto the main road. I drove 90 miles an hour straight to the nearest police station. When the cops searched the back of my car, they found a roll of duct tape and a heavy steel wrench on the floorboard that definitely didn't belong to me. If I hadn't rammed that SUV, I am 100% sure I would have been a true crime documentary. Story 7. The Intercom. Living alone in a city apartment builds a certain kind of thick skin. You get used to strange noises, neighbors yelling, and the occasional weirdo on the street. But your apartment is supposed to be your sanctuary. Behind that deadbolt, you are safe. A few months ago, I was woken up at 4:30 a.m. by a loud buzzing. It was the intercom system connecting my apartment to the front lobby door down on the street. Nobody comes over at 4:30 a.m. I laid in bed, hoping they had just pressed the wrong button and would go away. But 10 seconds later, it buzzed again. Long, continuous, and aggressive. I dragged myself out of bed, walked into the hallway, and looked at the small black and white video monitor connected to the intercom. There was a woman standing in the lobby. She looked completely ordinary. Business casual coat, neat hair, holding a purse. She didn't look drunk or high. I pressed the talk button. "Hello. Who is this?" She stared directly into the camera. "Let me in. I forgot my keys." "You have the wrong apartment," I said. "I don't know you." Her expression didn't change. She just repeated it, word for word, in the exact same tone. "Let me in. I forgot my keys." I didn't answer. I just watched her on the monitor. After a minute of silence, she slowly reached into her purse. I held my breath, wondering if she was pulling out a gun or a tool to break the door. Instead, she pulled out a piece of paper and held it up to the camera lens. It was a printed photograph. Because the camera was black and white and low resolution, it took me a few seconds to process what I was looking at. When I finally realized what it was, my knees actually buckled. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed. From the angle of the shot, it had to have been taken from inside my bedroom, standing directly over me. I backed away from the monitor, ran to my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called 911, locking myself in the bathroom. The police arrived less than 10 minutes later. They searched the building and the surrounding streets, but the woman was gone. They swept my apartment. They found no signs of forced entry. The windows were locked. The deadbolt was secure. But when they checked the ventilation shaft above my bed, they found the grate had been unscrewed, and there were fresh scuff marks in the dust inside the vent. Someone had been living in the crawlspace above my ceiling. I moved out the very next morning and left half my furniture behind.
And that's going to do it for tonight's terrifying stories here on Wetrussad. If these stories made your skin crawl, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss our next ascent into the unknown. We have plenty more nightmares to share. Have you ever experienced something you just couldn't explain? Drop your own terrifying true stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might just be featured in our next video. Stay safe out there. And remember, just because you're alone in the room doesn't mean you're actually alone. Good night.